Marcus Chen stood perfectly still in the morning mist, his polished boots reflecting the pale light of Kepler 442b's twin suns. The tomb of the fallen stretched before him like a crystal cathedral, its translucent walls holding the remains of 3,000 souls from a dozen different species. Each name was etched in their native script, a testament to the final battle that had saved this sector from the Void Swarm 20 years ago. His military dress uniform was immaculate despite the early hour. Every brass button gleamed, every crease was sharp enough to cut paper. The ceremonial rifle across his shoulder had never fired a shot in anger, but Marcus treated it with the same respect he would give any weapon. This was his post, his duty, and he had maintained it without fail for 18 months. The commute to the tomb took most students from New Geneva Academy past his position. They would whisper as they passed, some with curiosity, others with the casual dismissal that came with youth. Marcus never acknowledged them. His eyes remained fixed ahead, watching over the dead who had given everything so these children could attend school in safety. Today felt different, though. The air carried more than just the usual humidity from the nearby lakes. There was tension, the kind that made his old soldier instincts prickle with unease. "Look at him," came a voice from the approaching group of students, standing there like some kind of statue. "Does he even blink?" Marcus recognized the speaker without turning. Zethkar, a young Valorian whose blue-scaled skin marked him as nobility among his people. The boy was tall for his age, with the natural arrogance that came from never being told no. His family had significant influence in the colonial government, and he wielded that influence like a club. "My father says humans are obsessed with death," Zethkar continued, his voice carrying the practiced cruelty of someone who enjoyed an audience. "Look how he worships these corpses. It's primitive." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Valorians had not lost anyone in the battle this tomb commemorated. Their ships had arrived 3 days after the fighting ended, claiming mechanical difficulties had delayed them. The truth was more complicated, but Marcus was not here to judge the living. His duty was to the dead. "I heard he talks to them," added another voice. This one belonged to Sarah Hendricks, a human girl whose parents had made their fortune in rare mineral exports. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and her uniform bore modifications that skirted the edge of Academy regulations. Like they can hear him or something. "It's creepy. Maybe we should test that theory," suggested a third student whose name Marcus did not know. The boy's accent marked him as coming from one of the inner colonies, where the war had been distant news rather than daily terror. Marcus felt his shoulders square slightly. These children had no understanding of what they mocked. They had never seen a friend die screaming in vacuum. They had never held a comrade as life fled from her eyes. They had never stood over graves dug in alien soil and promised the dead that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. The group was closer now, close enough that Marcus could smell the expensive perfumes and colognes that marked them as Academy elite. Their footsteps slowed as they approached his position, and he could feel their attention like heat on his back. "My bet is he won't even flinch," Zethkar said, pulling something from his backpack. "Humans are supposed to be these great warriors, but look at him. Just standing there while we plan his humiliation." Marcus had seen enough battlefield psychology to recognize what was happening. These children were working themselves up, feeding off each other's energy, and daring each other to escalate. It was pack behavior, dangerous in its predictability. "What did you bring?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Remember that stink bomb we made in chemistry? The one that cleared half the wing?" Zethkar's laugh was sharp and cruel. "I made another one. Bigger this time. We're going to see if our statue friend can maintain his dignity while smelling like a garbage dump." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. These children did not understand what they were about to do. This was not just about him. This was about the tomb, about the sacred space he protected, about the honor due to those who had died in service to something greater than themselves. "That's brilliant," the third boy said. "But what if he reports us? My father will kill me if I get expelled." "Reports us to who?" Zethkar scoffed. "He's just a guard, a human guard at that. My family has more influence than his entire species on this world. Besides, what's he going to say? That some kids threw a bad smell at him? They'll laugh him out of the colonial office." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. The casual dismissal, the assumption that his service meant nothing. the complete disregard for the sanctity of this place. It all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. These children were about to learn a lesson that their expensive educations had failed to provide. The morning air carried the sound of the academy's warning bell, signaling that classes would begin soon. Most students would hurry past now, eager to avoid tardiness marks. But this group lingered, their excitement building like storm clouds on the horizon. Marcus had been prepared for many things when he accepted this posting. Attack by raiders, political interference, even the occasional drunk veteran trying to leave unauthorized tributes. But he had not expected to face the casual cruelty of privileged children, who saw his dedication as weakness and his honor as a joke. Behind him, the tomb's crystal walls hummed softly in the morning breeze, a sound like distant prayers. The dead waited, patient as always, trusting him to protect their rest. Marcus straightened his shoulders and prepared to show these children what it truly meant to guard something sacred. The lesson was about to begin. Zethkar pulled the small device from his bag with practiced ease. The chemical mixture inside had been refined over weeks of experimentation, designed to produce the most offensive odor possible while remaining technically non-harmful. To him, it was simply the latest in a series of pranks that had made him legendary among certain circles at the academy. "Remember," he whispered to his companions, "we throw it and run. The smell will stick to him for hours, and everyone passing will know what happened. Perfect humiliation." Sarah giggled softly, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Do you think he'll break character?" "I've always wondered what it would take to make him react." "Humans are emotional creatures," Zethkar replied with the casual superiority his people were known for. "Beneath that soldier facade, he's probably barely containing himself already. This will shatter whatever discipline he thinks he has." The third boy, whose name was David Morrison from the Centauri settlements, nodded eagerly. His parents had specifically sent him to New Geneva Academy to network with influential families. Participating in Zethkar's pranks felt like an investment in his future. Marcus heard every word with crystal clarity. His enhanced hearing, a modification earned through years of military service, picked up their whispered planning as clearly as if they were shouting. More importantly, he heard the casual dismissal of everything he represented. To them, he was not a guardian of sacred space or a protector of memory. He was simply a target for their amusement. The crystalline walls of the tomb reflected the early morning light in patterns that reminded Marcus of stained glass, windows from ancient earth. Each refraction carried the memory of those interred within. Commander Sarah Walsh, who had held the evacuation route open until the last civilian transport escaped. Engineer Tokanal, whose sacrifice had kept the fusion reactors stable during the final assault. Young Private Martinez, barely 18 when he threw himself on a void mine to save his squad. These were not just names carved in stone. They were heroes who had chosen duty over safety, service over self. And now 3 spoiled children wanted to desecrate their resting place for entertainment. "On 3, Zethkar said, arming the device with a soft click. 1, 2. Marcus moved with the fluid precision that had kept him alive through 7 years of frontier warfare. His body shifted almost imperceptibly, a movement so subtle that the students missed it entirely. But that tiny adjustment changed everything. 3. Zethkar hurled the stink bomb with enthusiasm, aiming for Marcus's back. The device arced through the air, its timer already counting down to release. But instead of striking its intended target, it hit the edge of Marcus's ceremonial rifle and bounced back toward the group of students. The explosion of noxious gas caught all 3 conspirators in its cloud. The smell was beyond description, a mixture of rotting protein, sulfur compounds, and chemical irritants that seemed designed to offend every possible sense. Sarah screamed and stumbled backward, her perfect hair falling across her face as she retched. David doubled over, his expensive breakfast making an unwelcome reappearance. Zethkar, caught by surprise and breathing the largest concentration of the gas, began coughing violently as his scales shifted to a pale, sickly color. Marcus remained perfectly motionless, not even a hair out of place. The chemical cloud dispersed around him as if he existed in a bubble of clean air. His breathing remained steady and controlled, his gaze never wavering from its position overlooking the tomb's entrance. "What? How did he?" Sarah gasped between retches, her voice barely audible over her own choking. "That's impossible," Zethkar wheezed, his voice strained as he tried to process what had just happened. I threw it right at him. I saw it hit his rifle. David managed to croak, wiping his mouth with a trembling hand. It bounced off his rifle, but Marcus knew better. The rifle had not moved. Neither had he, at least not in any way these children could perceive. What they had witnessed was not luck or accident. It was the result of training so intensive that most beings would consider it impossible. The Terran Military Academy's Advanced Combat School had a saying, "Perfect positioning is invisible until it matters." Marcus had spent 2 years learning to read trajectories, to calculate angles and velocities in real time, to position himself in space with mathematical precision, a skill designed for deflecting plasma bolts and redirecting projectiles in combat, had proved equally effective against a poorly thrown stink bomb. Other students were beginning to notice the commotion. The smell carried on the morning breeze, and several groups had stopped to stare at the 3 Academy elites, who were now stumbling around in obvious distress. Whispers began to spread, and Marcus caught fragments of conversation as more students gathered. "Is that Zethkar throwing up? What's that awful smell? Why does Sarah look like she's been crying? Look at the tomb guard. He hasn't moved at all." Zethkar tried to straighten himself, his pride warring with his body's rebellion against the chemical assault. His scales had returned to their normal blue color, but his eyes were watering freely and his voice was hoarse. "This isn't over," he managed to say, though his words were directed more at maintaining his reputation than at Marcus himself. "My father will hear about this. There will be consequences." Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the growing crowd of students without any increase in volume. It was a trick learned from addressing troops across a battlefield, projecting authority without shouting. "The tomb is a place of honor," he said simply. "Those who cannot show respect should not approach." The words were quiet, respectful, and completely devastating. Every student present understood the implication. Marcus had not needed to defend himself or his position. The 3 bullies had defeated themselves through their own actions, and everyone had witnessed it. Sarah tried to salvage some dignity by adjusting her ruined hair, but the smell clung to her like a second skin, her expensive perfume now mixed with the stink bomb's residue, to create something even worse than either component. Alone, David was quietly panicking as he calculated the social cost of being associated with this disaster. His carefully cultivated image was crumbling as more students arrived to witness his humiliation. But Zethkar was different. Marcus could see the anger building behind the young Valorian's eyes, the rage of someone who had never been denied anything now facing a public failure. This was not over. If anything, it was just beginning. The crowd of students continued to grow, drawn by the spectacle and the increasingly strong smell. Academy instructors would arrive soon, drawn by the commotion. Questions would be asked, reports would be filed, and 3 influential families would demand explanations. Marcus returned his attention to the tomb, dismissing the children as completely as if they had never existed. The dead deserved better than to have their guardian distracted by the living's petty dramas. But deep in his soldier's heart, he knew this incident was merely the opening move in a much larger game. The bullies had wanted to humiliate him. Instead, they had humiliated themselves. Now the question was whether they would learn from the experience or double down on their arrogance. Based on the look in Zethkar's eyes, Marcus suspected it would be the latter. Army Rangers put a tomb headmaster. Iraltan arrived at the tomb within minutes of receiving the emergency notification. The elderly Kalari moved with surprising speed despite his advanced age, his forearms gesturing in patterns that indicated both concern and frustration. Behind him followed Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Academy's human liaison and security chief Cordon, whose massive Thurok frame cast a shadow over the assembled students. The smell hit them before they reached the crowd. Dr. Vasquez immediately activated her personal air filtration unit, while Cordon simply grunted in annoyance. Headmaster Iraltan's sensitive nasal cavities flared once before sealing shut in a defensive reflex. His species had evolved over millennia. "Disperse immediately," Cordon commanded, his voice carrying the natural authority of a predator species. "Return to your classes or face disciplinary action." The students scattered quickly, but not before casting backward glances at the 3 figures still struggling with the aftermath of their failed prank. Sarah had managed to stop retching but remained pale and shaky. David had found a handkerchief and was desperately trying to clean himself, while maintaining some semblance of dignity. Zethkar stood apart from his companions, his posture radiating defiance despite his obvious discomfort. "Guard Chen," Headmaster Irultan said, approaching Marcus with the respect due to a military veteran, "please provide your account of the incident." Marcus's response was precise and economical, delivered without shifting his attention from the tomb. "3 students approached my position with apparent intent to disrupt my duties. One threw a chemical device. The device malfunctioned and affected the throwers rather than reaching its intended target. No damage was done to the memorial site." Dr. Vasquez raised an eyebrow at the clinical description. She had reviewed Marcus's military record when he was assigned to the tomb posting, and knew exactly what kind of training produced such controlled responses. The phrase "device malfunctioned" was particularly interesting, given what she could observe about the trajectory pattern still visible in the morning dew. "That's not what happened." Zethkar burst out, his voice cracking with indignation. "He did something. The bomb was aimed perfectly, and then suddenly it was flying back at us. Humans have some kind of technology, some enhancement that lets them—" "Enough," Security Chief Cordon growled, stepping forward with deliberate menace. The Thurok species had evolved from pack hunters, and their instinctive understanding of dominance hierarchies made them excellent at crowd control. "You admit to bringing an explosive device onto Academy grounds?" "It wasn't explosive," Sarah protested weakly. "It was just a stink bomb. A harmless prank." "Harmless?" Dr. Vasquez stepped closer to examine the 3 students. "You're all showing signs of chemical exposure. Respiratory irritation, skin inflammation, possible corneal damage. Ms. Hendricks, when did you last have your allergy panel updated?" Sarah's face went even paler as she realized the implications. Severe allergic reactions to unknown chemical compounds could result in medical emergency protocols, family notifications, and extensive investigations. Headmaster Irultan observed the scene with the patience that came from decades of managing young beings from dozens of different species. His secondary eyes remained fixed on Marcus while his primary gaze assessed the 3 students. "Mr. Zethkar," he said finally, "your family has been generous supporters of this academy. They have also been quite clear about their expectations regarding your behavior and academic performance. How do you think they will respond to learning that you brought chemical weapons onto school grounds?" "They weren't weapons," Zethkar protested, but his voice carried less conviction now. Valorian society placed enormous emphasis on honor and proper conduct. Being associated with chemical attacks, even pranks, could have serious implications for his family's standing. "Mr. Morrison," the headmaster continued, "your parents specifically enrolled you here to distance you from the rough crowd you had associated with on Centauri. Prime, I believe this incident might suggest that the problem was not your environment." David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again as he realized anything he said would only make things worse. "Ms. Hendricks," Dr. Vasquez interjected, "your parents fund the chemistry laboratory where this device was presumably created. They're going to have some very pointed questions about how their daughter gained access to restricted compounds." The 3 students stood in increasingly desperate silence as the full scope of their situation became clear. What had seemed like a harmless prank 20 minutes ago was rapidly becoming a scandal that could affect their families' reputations and their own futures. Marcus remained motionless throughout the exchange, but Dr. Vasquez noticed the slight tension in his jaw that suggested controlled anger. She had seen similar expressions on other veterans when civilians treated their service as a joke. "Guard Chen," she said quietly, "would you be willing to provide a more detailed statement for our investigation?" "If required," Marcus replied. "However, I would prefer to minimize disruption to this sacred space. The fallen deserve peace." It was a masterful response, Dr. Vasquez realized. Marcus was simultaneously demonstrating his commitment to his duties, while subtly reminding everyone present of what the 3 students had really attempted to do. They had not simply played a prank on a guard. They had attempted to desecrate a memorial to war heroes. Zethkar seemed to grasp this implication as well, and his defiance began to crack. "We didn't mean... It wasn't supposed to be about the tomb. It was just about him. I am here because of the tomb," Marcus said, speaking directly to the young Valorian for the first time. "I exist in this place only as its guardian. To attack me here is to attack what I guard." The simple statement carried such quiet conviction that even Security Chief Cordon seemed impressed. The Thurok species understood protective instincts at a fundamental level, and Marcus's words resonated with something primal in the large alien's psychology. "The three of you will report to my office immediately," Headmaster Irultan declared. "Your parents will be contacted and formal disciplinary proceedings will begin. This incident will be documented in your permanent academic records." As the officials led the three students away, Dr. Vasquez lingered behind. She approached Marcus carefully, respecting the invisible boundary that seemed to surround his position. "That was remarkably restrained," she said. "Your military record suggests you could have handled this situation in many different ways." Marcus's response was barely audible, meant only for her ears. "They are children, Doctor. Foolish, privileged children, but children nonetheless. The Deadeye Guard died so that children could grow up safely, even children who do not understand the gift they have been given." Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. "And if they had actually succeeded in disrupting the memorial?" For the first time since the incident began, Marcus's expression changed. It was subtle, just a slight hardening around his eyes, but it was enough to answer her question completely. Then they would have learned why humans are considered the most dangerous species in this sector when properly motivated. Dr. Vasquez believed him completely. As she walked away, she made a mental note to review the Academy's policies regarding respect for military memorials. Perhaps it was time for a mandatory education program about the sacrifices that had made their peaceful lives possible. Behind her, Marcus returned to his vigil, once again becoming as still and silent as the stones that marked the graves of heroes. Guard to the test. His one shot left them speechless. 3 days after the incident, the ripple effects were still spreading through New Geneva Academy's elite social circles. The Morrison family had quietly begun the process of transferring David to a different institution, hoping to contain the damage to their reputation. Sarah Hendricks had been confined to her family's estate while expensive lawyers worked to minimize her involvement in what was now being called the chemical incident. But Zethkar's situation was different. The young Valorian sat in his family's palatial offices overlooking the colonial capital, facing his father's cold displeasure across a desk made from crystallized Thurok bone, a trophy from the elder Zethkar's military service decades ago. "Explain to me," General Velkar said, his voice carrying the quiet menace that had once intimidated entire enemy fleets, "how my son came to be publicly humiliated by a human guard." Zethkar shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His father's disapproval was a tangible force in the room, made worse by the presence of Colonel Shinal, the family's military advisor and Zethkar's combat instructor. "The human has some kind of enhancement," Zethkar insisted, repeating the story he had constructed over the past 3 days. "No one could have deflected that device without artificial assistance. He's probably using illegal modifications, stolen military technology." General Velkar's scales darkened to a deep navy blue, a sign of mounting anger among his people. "You think a human guard has access to technology that our intelligence services cannot detect? You believe he has enhancements that escape the notice of Academy security systems, designed by the finest minds in 3 sectors? Father, Silence!" The general's voice cut through his son's protest like a plasma blade. "Colonel Shinal, provide your assessment." The colonel activated a holographic display showing surveillance footage from the tomb area. The images were grainy due to the respectful distance maintained by the Academy's security cameras, but the basic sequence of events was clear. The human's positioning was flawless, Colonel Shinal explained, highlighting Marcus's subtle movements in the recording. "Note how he shifts his weight exactly 0.3 seconds before the device is thrown. His rifle angle changes by precisely 4 degrees. These are not the actions of someone with technological enhancements. These are the reflexes of someone with extraordinary training." "Training?" Zethkar scoffed. "He's just a tomb guard, a ceremonial position." General Velkar stood slowly, his considerable height casting a shadow across his son. "That ceremonial guard is Master Sergeant Marcus Chen, formerly of the Terran Shock Infantry's 3rd Regiment. His combat record includes the Siege of Proxima Station, the Battle of the Asteroid Belt, and the final assault on the Void Swarm's primary hive ship." The names meant little to Zethkar, who had grown up in peacetime comfort, but Colonel Shinal straightened with obvious respect. "The 3rd Regiment? the colonel said. Father, perhaps we should reconsider our approach to this situation. What do you mean? Zethkar demanded, frustrated by the adult's obvious concern over what seemed like military trivia. The Terran 3rd Regiment was disbanded after the war. General Velkar explained with the patience of someone educating a particularly slow student. Not because of casualties or political decisions, but because their methods were considered too extreme for peacetime service. They were soldiers who specialized in impossible missions and suicidal charges, the kind of humans that other humans fear. That's ridiculous, Zethkar protested. Humans are emotional and weak. Everyone knows that. The silence that followed his statement was deafening. General Velkar and Colonel Shinal exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their shared combat experience and their assessment of human military capabilities. Colonel, the general said finally, show my son the classified footage from the Battle of Kepler Station. Sir, that material is restricted. Show him. The holographic display shifted to show grainy combat footage from a battlefield Zethkar had never seen. Human soldiers in powered armor moved through scenes of indescribable carnage, their movements precise and economical even in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. Watch this section carefully, Colonel Shinal instructed, highlighting a single figure moving through the chaos. Single human soldier, separated from his unit, facing 17 Void swarm drones in close combat. Zethkar watched in growing unease as the lone human systematically dismantled the enemy force, using nothing but standard equipment and terrifying efficiency. The soldiers' movements were similar to what he had observed at the tomb. Economical, precise and seemingly effortless, that soldier, General Velkar said quietly, survived 43 similar engagements during the war. His unit's motto was, "Death before dishonor." They were volunteers who chose the most dangerous assignments specifically because someone had to do them. This is irrelevant, Zethkar said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. That was war. This is just a school prank gone wrong. You attempted to humiliate a warrior at his post, the general replied. In doing so, you have brought shame upon our family name and demonstrated a complete lack of understanding about the forces that shape our reality. Colonel Shinal deactivated the display and turned to face Zethkar directly. Young master, your father is attempting to educate you about the difference between ceremony and substance. That human stands guard over the graves of beings who died to protect this world. Among his people, such duty is considered sacred, so what? Zethkar's frustration was boiling over. Are you saying I should apologize to some human? That I should bow down to a member of an inferior species? The crack of his father's palm across his face echoed through the office like a gunshot. Zethkar staggered backward, more shocked than hurt, one hand rising to touch his stinging cheek. That human, General Velkar said in a voice like winter ice, has killed more enemies of this colony than you have brain cells. He stands guard over heroes while you waste your privileged life playing pranks and demonstrating ignorance. If you had succeeded in desecrating that memorial, the consequences would have extended far beyond academy discipline. What do you mean? The Terran Military Council maintains observers throughout this sector, Colonel Shinal explained. Disrespecting their war dead is considered an act of aggression. Your little prank could have triggered a diplomatic incident that might have required military intervention to resolve. Zethkar felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. What had seemed like a simple matter of social dominance was revealing itself to be something far more complex and dangerous. However, General Velkar continued, you now have an opportunity to demonstrate that you can learn from your mistakes. You will return to the academy tomorrow and you will publicly apologize to Guard Chen. You will acknowledge your error and request his forgiveness. I will not, Zethkar exploded. I will not humiliate myself before a human, regardless of his military record. My reputation? Your reputation, his father interrupted, is currently that of a fool who attacked a war hero and lost. Apologizing might salvage some small measure of honor from this disaster. Zethkar's pride warred with his growing understanding of the situation's seriousness, but adolescent arrogance won out over wisdom. Find another way, he said defiantly. I will not apologize to that human. There must be some other solution. Some way to handle this that doesn't require me to grovel. General Velkar stared at his son for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, Colonel Shinal. Contact our legal department. If my son insists on escalating this situation, we will need to prepare for the consequences. As Zethkar left the office, he missed the meaningful look exchanged between the two veteran soldiers. He had no idea that his refusal to show proper respect had just set in motion a chain of events that would teach him lessons his expensive education had failed to provide. The formal inquiry convened in the Academy's main conference chamber, 5 days after the incident. What had begun as a simple disciplinary matter had grown into something that required the attention of colonial officials, military liaisons, and diplomatic representatives from multiple species. Ambassador Chen Lin sat at the head of the diplomatic table, her crisp uniform bearing the insignia of the Terran Colonial Service. Despite sharing a surname with the tomb guard, she was no relation, Chen being one of the most common names among the human population. However, her presence indicated that the Terran government was taking this matter seriously enough to assign one of their senior diplomats. Across from her sat General Velkar, accompanied by his legal team and wearing the formal regalia of a Valorian military commander. The crystal decorations on his chest represented battles fought and honors earned, a display meant to remind everyone present of his status and influence. Headmaster Iriltan occupied the neutral position between the two factions, his four hands occasionally gesturing in patterns that indicated diplomatic stress. This was exactly the kind of interspecies incident that could damage the Academy's reputation and complicate the delicate political balance that kept the colony functioning. Let me ensure I understand the situation correctly, Ambassador Chen said, reviewing the documents before her. A Valorian student attempted to deploy a chemical device against a human veteran, serving as honor guard at a war memorial. When the device failed to reach its target, the student's family has chosen to file a formal complaint, alleging that the guard used illegal enhancements to defend himself. The allegation is not without merit, General Velkar replied carefully. Our analysis of the incident suggests that the trajectory deviation was beyond the capabilities of an unenhanced human. Dr. Elena Vasquez, serving as the Academy's representative, activated a holographic display showing detailed sensor readings from the tomb area. Our investigation found no evidence of technological enhancement. However, Guard Chen did consent to a full medical and equipment scan to address these concerns. The display showed the results of comprehensive testing, biometric scans, electromagnetic resonance imaging, and molecular analysis of Marcus's uniform and equipment. Every reading fell within normal parameters for an unmodified human. These results could be falsified, General Velkar's chief legal advisor interjected. Human technology is notoriously sophisticated in matters of deception. Ambassador Chen's expression remained diplomatically neutral, but her tone carried a subtle edge. General, are you suggesting that the Terran Colonial Service would falsify official medical records to protect a single guard? Or perhaps that we have developed technology so advanced that it can fool Valorian sensors while leaving no trace of its existence? The implication was clear. Either humans possessed technology far beyond what the Valorians had suspected, making them a potential threat, or the General's accusations were baseless and insulting. Perhaps, Headmaster Iriltan interjected quickly, we should focus on finding a resolution that serves everyone's interests. Mr. Zethkar, would you like to present your perspective? The young Valorian sat beside his father, wearing formal academic robes that did little to hide his obvious discomfort. The past week had been a nightmare of interviews, legal consultations, and growing awareness that his actions had consequences far beyond anything he had imagined. That is, my intention was never to cause a diplomatic incident, he began carefully, reading from prepared notes. The device was meant as a harmless prank, similar to those common among students throughout the galaxy. A prank targeting a memorial to war dead, Ambassador Chen observed quietly. Mr. Zethkar, are you familiar with how human culture views such actions? Zethkar glanced at his father, seeking guidance, but found only stern disapproval. I did not fully understand the cultural significance. The memorial commemorates the Battle of Kepler 442b, Dr. Vasquez explained, activating another display. 1,700 coalition personnel died in that engagement, including members of every species represented in this room. They died protecting the evacuation convoys that saved nearly 2 million civilians, including the families of current Academy students. The holographic display showed the battle's progression, desperate rearguard actions, ships ramming enemy vessels to buy time for escaping transports, soldiers making final stands in the ruins of destroyed outposts. It was a stark reminder of the price paid for the peace these young beings took for granted. Among the dead, Ambassador Chen continued, was Marcus Chen's younger brother, Private David Chen, age 19. The guard's posting to this memorial is not ceremonial duty, it is personal vigil. Silence filled the chamber as the implications sank in. What had seemed like a prank against a random guard was revealed to be an attack on someone standing watch over his own family's grave. General Velkar's scales shifted to a deep blue-black color that indicated profound shame among his people. This information was not included in the initial reports. Guard Chen considers his personal loss irrelevant to his duties, Dr. Vasquez replied. He requested that it not be mentioned unless directly relevant to these proceedings. Zethkar felt the weight of every eye in the room. His carefully prepared justification seemed suddenly hollow in the face of this revelation. He had attempted to humiliate a man standing guard over his brother's grave. However, Ambassador Chen continued, this incident has raised concerns beyond simple academy discipline. The Terran Military Council has reviewed the matter and identified several troubling patterns. She activated her own display, showing a series of incident reports spanning the past 2 years. 17 separate occasions where human veterans in ceremonial positions have faced harassment, mockery, or outright attack by non-human students. In each case, the perpetrators were from influential families and received minimal punishment. General Velkar studied the data with growing unease. The pattern was clear and damning. A systematic campaign of disrespect toward human military personnel. The Council's concern, Ambassador Chen explained, is whether this represents coordinated hostility toward human veterans or simply a failure of education about the realities of recent history. I assure you, Headmaster Iroltan said quickly, the Academy has no tolerance for systematic harassment of any species. Yet it continues, the ambassador interrupted, which raises the question of what measures might be necessary to ensure proper respect for those who serve. The threat was diplomatically phrased, but unmistakable. If the Academy could not protect human veterans from harassment, the Terran government might decide to protect them through other means. What resolution do you propose? General Velkar asked, recognizing that his son's actions had created a situation far beyond simple family embarrassment. Ambassador Chen consulted her notes briefly. Guard Chen has submitted a formal request. He asks only that Mr. Zethkar spend 1 day serving beside him at the memorial. Not as punishment, but as education, to understand what he mocked and why it matters. Zethkar's eyes widened in alarm. My schedule is quite demanding. Academy requirements, family obligation, 1 day, Ambassador Chen repeated. 8 hours standing watch beside a veteran over the graves of heroes. It seems a modest request given the circumstances. General Velkar looked at his son, recognizing the offer for what it was. A chance to salvage honor from disgrace. To learn rather than simply suffer consequences. My son will report to the memorial tomorrow morning, he announced, overriding Zethkar's obvious objection. He will serve as requested and conduct himself with appropriate respect. As the meeting concluded and participants began filing out, Zethkar remained seated, staring at the holographic images of the battle that still played silently above the conference table. Heroes dying for strangers, soldiers choosing duty over safety, beings from different worlds united in sacrifice. Tomorrow, he would stand beside Marcus Chen and try to understand what he had attempted to mock. The question was whether 1 day would be enough to bridge the gap between his privileged ignorance and the reality of what service meant. He was about to find out. Zethkar arrived at the memorial at dawn, wearing the formal uniform his father had chosen for him. The young Valorian's usual confidence was nowhere to be seen, replaced by nervous uncertainty about what the day would bring. He had never been required to stand still for 8 hours, never been expected to maintain dignity while performing actual duty. Marcus was already in position, as motionless as ever, his rifle perfectly aligned and his gaze fixed on the horizon. He acknowledged Zethkar's arrival with a slight nod but said nothing. For several minutes they stood in silence, broken only by the morning songs of alien birds and the distant hum of colonial traffic. Where should I? Zethkar began, then stopped, unsure how to ask such a basic question. 3 paces to my left, Marcus said quietly. Face the same direction. Do not move unless I give you permission. Zethkar took his position, immediately feeling exposed and awkward. The memorial's crystalline walls rose before them, each surface reflecting the morning light in patterns that seemed to shift with every breath. Up close, he could see details that had been invisible from a distance. Names etched in scripts from dozens of worlds. Small personal items embedded in the crystal like flowers in amber. Holographic images that activated as he watched. Is that? He started to ask, pointing at one of the images. Do not point, Marcus said without moving. Do not speak unless necessary. This is not a conversation. This is a vigil. Silence settled over them again, but now Zethkar was acutely aware of how difficult it was to remain motionless. His muscles began to ache within minutes. His back protested against the rigid posture, and his mind struggled with the unaccustomed emptiness of having nothing to do. An hour passed. Then 2. Students began their morning commute past the memorial, and Zethkar felt the weight of their curious stares. Some whispered as they recognized him. Others simply gawked at the unusual sight of the notorious troublemaker standing guard beside the tomb's protector. They're laughing at me, Zethkar muttered as a group of his former classmates passed. They laugh because they do not understand, Marcus replied. As you did not understand 5 days ago. Understand what? Marcus was quiet for so long that Zethkar thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that the young Valorian had never heard before. That every name on these walls represents someone who chose duty over comfort, someone who stood watch so others could sleep safely, someone who faced death so that children like those students could grow up in a universe where such choices seemed optional. Zethkar followed Marcus's gaze to the memorial walls, really looking at them for the first time. The names were not random inscriptions. They were arranged by unit, by species, by the battles where they had fallen. Human names clustered beside Valorian ones. Kalari symbols intertwined with Thurok pictographs, all united in their final service. Captain Sarah Walsh, Marcus said, nodding toward one section of the wall, Valorian, held the evacuation route open for 6 hours while the civilian transports loaded refugees. She could have retreated with her unit, but chose to stay until the last transport was away. The void swarm overran her position 17 minutes later. Zethkar stared at the Valorian name, recognizing the ancient noble lineage it represented. This was not some obscure soldier. This was a member of one of his people's most respected families. Lieutenant Gental of the Kalari Engineering Corps, Marcus continued, indicating another section, stayed behind to manually stabilize the fusion reactors when the automated systems failed. The radiation exposure killed him in hours, but his sacrifice prevented a meltdown that would have taken out half the spaceport. Story after story, name after name, Marcus recited the details of sacrifice and service that the memorial preserved. Each tale revealed heroes who had faced impossible choices and chosen the path that saved others at the cost of their own lives. How do you know all this? Zethkar asked, his voice barely audible. Because it is my duty to know, Marcus replied. Because someone must remember what they gave and why it mattered. Because the dead deserve to have their stories told. The sun climbed higher and Zethkar's discomfort grew more intense. His legs trembled with fatigue. His uniform was soaked with sweat and his pride rebelled against the humiliation of public service. But gradually something else began to penetrate his awareness. The peace around him was not natural. It existed because beings had died to create it. The comfortable life he had always known was built on foundations of sacrifice that he had never bothered to acknowledge. The freedom to attend academy, to play pranks, to waste time on trivial pursuits, all of it had been purchased with blood. Your brother, Zethkar said suddenly. Private David Chen, tell me about him. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment Zethkar thought he had overstepped some invisible boundary. Then Marcus spoke, his voice carefully controlled. He was 18, enlisted the day after his high school graduation, despite having a scholarship to university. Said someone had to stand between the void swarm and the civilians, and he was tired of waiting for other people to volunteer. What happened to him? Void mine. He threw himself on it to save his squad when they were trapped in a collapsed bunker. 7 soldiers made it home because my little brother chose to die. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Zethkar tried to imagine making such a choice, tried to envision choosing certain death to save strangers. The concept seemed almost alien to his privileged experience. "I didn't know," he said finally. "When I threw that device, I didn't know what this place meant." "No," Marcus agreed. "You did not know. But ignorance is not an excuse for disrespect. It is a reason to learn." Hours passed in contemplative silence. Zethkar's body screamed for relief, but he forced himself to maintain position. Gradually, he began to understand what Marcus endured every day. Not just the physical demands of the vigil, but the emotional weight of standing guard over so much loss. "Why do you do this?" Zethkar asked as the afternoon wore on.
"Why stand here day after day watching over the dead?"
Marcus turned his head slightly, looking directly at the young Valorian for the first time since the vigil began. His eyes held depths that spoke of experiences Zethkar could barely imagine. "Because someone must bear witness," he said simply. "Because the dead cannot speak for themselves, so the living must speak for them. Because the price of peace is eternal vigilance and someone must pay that price. But it's just you, one person. What difference can one guard make?" Marcus smiled then, an expression so sad and profound that it made Zethkar's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. One person can hold a line. One person can choose duty over comfort. One person can stand between civilization and chaos. He paused, his gaze returning to the memorial walls. One person can remember what matters when everyone else has forgotten. As the sun began to set, painting the memorial walls in shades of amber and gold, Zethkar understood that he had been given a gift more valuable than his expensive education. He had been shown what true service looked like, what real honor meant, what it cost to build a world where young beings could grow up safely. When the 8 hours finally ended and Marcus dismissed him, Zethkar did not immediately leave. Instead, he stood for a moment longer, looking at the names on the walls with new understanding. "Guard Chen," he said formally, "I owe you an apology that cannot be adequately expressed. I also owe you gratitude for showing me what I could not see before." Marcus nodded once, accepting the words without comment. As Zethkar walked away, his mind raced with questions about duty, sacrifice, and the price of the peace he had always taken for granted. The boy who had arrived at dawn seeking to fulfill an obligation was not the same being who departed at sunset. Something fundamental had changed, and both Marcus and Zethkar knew that the real lesson was just beginning. 3 months later, the morning ritual at the memorial had changed dramatically. Marcus still stood his solitary watch, but he was no longer alone. Beside him, maintaining perfect posture and silent respect, stood Zethkar. The young Valorian had returned the day after his required service, then again the day after that. What had begun as diplomatic obligation had transformed into something Marcus had never expected: genuine understanding and voluntary partnership. "Tell me about Commander Torres," Zethkar said quietly during a brief respite when no students were passing. Marcus glanced at the section of wall the young Valorian indicated, where a human name was inscribed alongside 3 Thurok pictographs and a Kalari symbol cluster. The arrangement told a story of integrated command that had been revolutionary for its time. "She was the first human to command a mixed-species tactical unit," Marcus replied. "The Thurok initially refused to serve under her, claiming humans were too small and weak to lead warriors. She challenged their strongest fighter to single combat to prove her worth. Did she win? She lost," Marcus said with something approaching amusement. "Badly. But she kept getting back up, kept fighting until the Thurok warrior had to carry her to the medical station. Their respect was not for her strength, but for her refusal to quit." Zethkar nodded, understanding the distinction. Over the past months, he had learned that human military philosophy was built on such concepts, not being the strongest or fastest, but being the most persistent, the most adaptable, the most willing to sacrifice for principles larger than themselves. The academy's morning rush was beginning, and both guards returned to formal silence as students passed, but the dynamic had shifted in ways that rippled through the entire educational community. Word had spread about Zethkar's transformation, about the voluntary vigil he now maintained alongside the human veteran. Other students had begun to take notice. Some came with genuine curiosity about the memorial and its significance. Others arrived with flowers or small tokens of respect, adding them to the growing collection of tributes at the base of the crystalline walls. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached during a brief lull in foot traffic, carrying a data tablet and wearing the satisfied expression of someone delivering good news. The Colonial Education Council has approved the curriculum changes, she announced. Mandatory instruction on the Coalition War will begin next semester. Every student will learn the history of the battles, the sacrifices made, and the ongoing responsibility to honor those who served. Marcus nodded acknowledgement, but did not break his position. However, Zethkar turned to face the doctor with obvious interest. All students? He asked, including the advanced placement tracks? Especially the advanced placement tracks, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. The council's position is that future leaders need to understand the foundations of the peace they will inherit. It was a remarkable victory, achieved not through diplomatic pressure or political maneuvering, but through the simple example of two beings standing together in respectful silence. The image of a Valorian noble voluntarily serving beside a human veteran had captured imaginations throughout the colony. There's more, Dr. Vasquez continued. The Terran Veterans Affairs Office has requested permission to establish a memorial program throughout the sector. They want to place honor guards at every coalition memorial, with local students invited to participate in educational exchanges. Zethkar felt a surge of pride at the news. His personal transformation was becoming a template for broader change, a model for how different species could learn to understand and respect each other's sacrifices. Guard Chen, Dr. Vasquez said formally, I have a message from the colonial governor. She wants to know if you would be willing to accept a promotion to Chief Memorial Guardian, with authority to oversee the expanded program. For the first time in months, Marcus broke his perfect stillness. He turned to look directly at the doctor, his expression thoughtful. The position would require me to train other guards to travel between memorials, to ensure consistent standards of respect and remembrance, Dr. Vasquez explained. It would mean leaving this post. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus had maintained his vigil for nearly 2 years, standing watch over his brother's grave and the resting places of 3,000 heroes. The thought of leaving seemed almost impossible. I would be honored to assist with training, Zethkar said suddenly, speaking with the formal precision he had learned from months of ceremonial duty. If Guard Chen accepts the promotion, I request permission to maintain the vigil here until a replacement can be properly prepared. Marcus stared at the young Valorian, seeing in his earnest expression a transformation that went far beyond simple education. The spoiled child who had tried to humiliate him had become a young adult who understood the weight of responsibility and the honor of service. The memorial would remain protected, Marcus said finally. The dead would not be forgotten. Never, Zethkar confirmed with absolute conviction. Dr. Vasquez smiled as she watched the exchange. The formal promotion ceremony would require weeks of planning, but the real transition had already begun. Marcus was no longer the solitary guardian of a forgotten memorial. He had become a teacher, a mentor, and the architect of a movement that would ensure no veteran's service was dismissed or mocked. As the doctor departed with news of Marcus's acceptance, the two guards returned to their silent vigil. But now their silence carried different meaning. It was no longer the isolation of a single protector, but the communion of shared purpose. When you leave for your new position, Zethkar said during another quiet moment, I want you to know that I understand what you have given me. Not just education about history, but instruction in what honor truly means. Marcus nodded slowly. The lesson was not mine to give, he replied. It was yours to discover. I merely provided the opportunity. No, Zethkar said with quiet certainty. You provided the example. Everything else followed from that. The sun climbed higher, beginning another day of their shared watch. Soon Marcus would leave to train other guards, to establish new memorials, to ensure that the sacrifices of the past were never again forgotten or dismissed. Zethkar would remain, carrying forward the vigil and the lessons it represented. But today, they stood together as they had for months, a human veteran and a young Valorian noble, united in their commitment to remember the dead and honor the price of peace. Around them, the memorial's crystalline walls caught the morning light and cast patterns of rainbow illumination across the ground, as if the heroes within were blessing their continued service. The bullies had tried to humiliate a tomb guard, thinking him weak and his duty meaningless. Instead, they had awakened something far more powerful. The understanding that true strength came not from domination, but from service, and that the greatest honor lay not in taking, but in giving. The lesson would spread far beyond a single memorial, carried by students who had learned to see past privilege to principle, by veterans who found their service honored rather than mocked, and by a society that remembered why peace was precious because they finally understood what it had cost. Marcus Chen had stood alone for nearly 2 years, guarding the memory of heroes. Now he would never stand alone again, because he had taught others to stand with him. In the end, that might be the greatest victory of all.